What up, Gromies? Alright, check it out. Hey, yo, what up? The name is NerdGrows. I got the buttery turf flows, the way I make these herbs grow. This one's for all my tent homies and my earth hoes.
Yo.
Wait,
what are you doing, man?
What?
Start the podcast.
Alright. What up, y'all? Welcome to episode 3 of the NerdGrows podcast. Before we get into today's topic, I want to discuss a few things at the top of the episode. The first is the gap between episode 2 and episode 3. Right after I dropped episode 2, the motherboard on my PC went, so I wasn't able to do much audio recording or editing. And it took a couple days of troubleshooting the computer to the point where, I narrowed it down to the motherboard and realized at this point I should just buy a new computer. Then I had to wait a week for the computer to come. So it took a minute, but I'm back in action now. The second thing is I want to clarify a detail from last episode, because after the last episode I got a few comments about it. So when I was talking about not listening to experienced growers during your first grow, based on the comments I got, I have a feeling it came off the wrong way to some people. Now, 100%, I wasn't trying to come off as arrogant, because I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm learning new stuff every single day. And I also didn't want to trivialize the skill that goes into cannabis growing. What I was talking about last episode wasn't buy yourself an AC Infinity setup and you're good and that's it, right? More so what I was trying to say is that everyone has their own style of growing, and experienced growers are naturally going to have more intricate growing processes, and they're going to have a higher eye for detail that new growers won't have. And the way I kind of think about it is you buy your first guitar and you're starting to learn a couple chords, and then a rock star comes up to you and is like, oh, you just got to play this crazy guitar solo and everyone will love you. And you're like, I just bought this guitar yesterday. I could barely hold it correctly, let alone play this high level guitar solo. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at, is that some of the advice that you're going to receive, it just may flat out be too intricate for someone who's new at growing. And that's just my feelings on it, because I learn about cannabis every day, or at least I try to. And there are some topics that I'm keeping off to the side for now while I try to learn the basics. And that's really what I was trying to get at, is start simple. You don't got to jump into I don't know. I don't even know. See, I don't even know what intricate thing to tell you about. But in my experience, when I was asking people how to grow and to give me advice on growing, I got so many different and oftentimes contradicting details from people, to the point where I was all right, I just need to build out my strategy myself. I'll take all the advice into consideration, but like I said, some of the advice was contradictory, so I had to pick a side. I had to pick which of my friends I thought was right, which one was wrong. But yeah, that's all I meant by that, was just some people, especially experienced growers, or especially content creators, which I know is funny because you're listening to my podcast, but a lot of content creators are affiliates of different companies, so they're biased towards wanting to sell you whatever product. So that's one side of it. Also, you have growers from all different locations giving you different advice that may not work with your climate, or even just, like I said, people that are so much more experienced than you, where you wouldn't be able to put their techniques into place correctly for yourself, at least not right now. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. And the third thing I wanted to talk about quick was the current status of my grow. I currently have 4 plants growing. So my double grape and my Walter White, they are on days 55 and 54 respectively. And then I have a Odin Sons on day 1 from Big Green Guy. And I have a little bonsai going that I bought thinking it was Silver Kush. I'm not going to say the name, but I bought it from a company that I found out had less than reputable genetics. So I just been using that as a bonsai, and honestly, it's looking good. Whatever mystery plant, whatever the genetics are gonna throw at me, it's doing pretty good so far. It's like just growing its fourth set of leaves, so it's like starting to get into veg. It's definitely, I wouldn't call it like a seedling anymore. And speaking of bonsais, I lost one this week. So from that same company, I had two seeds that were labeled as California Orange, I think was the strain. And I was trying to grow two in one. It was like a small, like a pint-sized ceramic pot, and I put two in it, and I was wrapping them around each other as the seedlings grew. And I got to the point where they were wrapped around each other like 3 times, and then I was gonna wait for them to get a little bit taller, and then LST them off to opposite sides of each other, so that way it would like twist and then branch out. And it was going really well. I was using this oversized paper clip to kind of hold all the coil of the two seedlings to hold it in place, and that was working perfectly. Except I had it in my tent. I had it in between my two main plants, between the double grape and the Walter White, and just the edge of the paperclip was hanging off of the side of the like off of the side of the pot. And I'm using fabric pots, so when I picked up one of the big pots to go water it, the side of the paperclip stuck on the fabric of the fabric pot, and it just ripped both seedlings out. So that was fun. So that was my first fail. Be very careful when moving stuff around in your tent. All right, so that's really all the like housekeeping I wanted to do today. And the topic I wanted to talk about today were things that I wish I could go back and tell myself before I started my first grow. So technically this is like a advice for new growers episode. However, I don't feel anywhere near that authoritative on this, seeing as I haven't even completed one grow yet. But I've definitely learned a lot and a lot of big lessons, and I do have like a handful of changes I want to make for the next set of plants. So the first lesson I've learned in my first grow is to always understand the gear that you're using as much as possible. As I said before, I'm using like a basic AC Infinity setup. I don't have the UIS humidifiers yet. I'm just using regular humidifiers. But like the exhaust system, the lights, the computer, the oscillating fan, all of that. And I believe I told the story on the last episode, but I didn't realize that you had to set the light to UIS mode in order to get it to link to the computer correctly. So out of the box, mine was just like set on 3, or maybe I had like moved it when I was installing it or something. But I didn't realize that my light was set to be on level 3 24/7. And I have the 69 controller from AC Infinity, and I have it linked to my phone, and I have the widget on the home screen of my phone. And I had it, I had the computer system set to 100% on a 18/6 schedule. But since the light wasn't set to UIS mode, it just wasn't, that schedule wasn't being transferred over to the light. And the only reason why I realized is because there was a night where I was up in the middle of the night and I had to, come down to the basement for something and notice that the light in the tent was still on. And then I was like, all right, that's weird. That shouldn't be happening. And then after some troubleshooting, I realized that I had the knob on the light to the wrong position. And then, yeah, it's been good since. And I would have never realized that was happening if I, didn't have the circumstance of having to go into the basement in the middle of the night. But yeah, take the time to really understand your grow room setup and the build for your grow room. And if I could go back and tell myself that, because I was really excited, like the grow tent came a day before my first seeds came. So I really only had like an afternoon to set everything up and get it running correctly, where I would have told myself to be more patient and take an extra day to, make sure your whole grow setup is fine-tuned before you plant any seeds. Because I also didn't realize about that light problem until maybe like almost 3 weeks into the grow. which I noticed that my seedlings were like stretching up really high. And I also was having a hard time maintaining like a higher temperature inside the tent. And even my friend was like, like your light's pretty cold. Like I know it's LED, but it's still pretty cold for LED. Not realizing that it was on level 3. So, I was showing him my phone. I was like, look, it's on level 10. I don't know what to tell you, but and that goes for anything, not even just like little gadgets and gizmos, but even just setting up your ductwork correctly, setting up your airflow and, your exhaust and your humidifier, being able to get like a consistent climate before you start anything. Now, the second lesson I want to bring up is to understand obviously understand your whole grow setup, but understand where other people are coming from with their grow setups when you're asking for advice or when people are giving you advice. Now, if you're talking to an experienced grower, they know how to do all this in their head, but especially if you're just watching like a random YouTuber or listening to a random podcast or even just like a friend that you have that's growing, everyone is biased by their own growing style, and one piece of advice may not translate to your grow style or your grow setup. So like, for example, if you're having problems with newts and then someone tells you how to correct them, but you're a soil grower and they're a cocoa grower, their advice may not translate into your grow setup. I almost think of it like a because I'm nerdy, like a role-playing game, right? Like your character has a special sword and a special shield and a helmet and armor, and that's kind of the same way I think about my grow room. Is like, this is like the exhaust, the fans, the humidifier, the pots I'm using, just all of that is almost like the way your character would have gear, like in a role-playing game. And let's just pull out the calculator quick. Alright, so just to make the numbers really easy, let's say there's 5 different ways to set up your grow room. There's 5 different companies that make growing medium or soil. There's 5 different newt companies. There's 5 different germination methods, 5 different training methods, 5 different watering methods, 5 different harvesting methods, 5 different curing methods, and 5 different drying methods. That comes out to 1,953,125 different possible grow style combinations. And we all know that there's way more than 5 in each of those categories. So that's me lowballing it and getting almost 2 million. And that's why it's really important to, when you're giving advice, understanding your own biases towards the way you like to grow, but also understanding the build and the grow style of the person that you're giving the advice to, and vice versa. Like, it's something that comes with experience, but if you're getting advice from someone, always make sure that the advice they're giving you at the very least translates to your grow style or your build. Like I said before, if you're talking to someone who's experienced, at least in my experience, they always ask you a couple questions, like what's your medium, what's your schedule like, what's your routine like, kind of thing. So that way they can tailor the advice they're giving you to your build. And that's really if you're talking to people either online or in person. But if you're just watching a bunch of YouTube videos, you have no idea like what that bias is that they're coming from. It's not a bad thing. Like I said, there's just literally millions of combinations of ways to grow cannabis. To go from seed to usable product, we're talking literally millions of combinations. And it's just something to keep in mind. And that's what I would, go back and tell myself in my first grow is like, set up your grow and make sure that any advice or anything you watch, like on YouTube, or if you're just listening to like a stray podcast episode about nutrients, like make sure that you know what style and what build the creator had in mind when they were giving this advice or making content that has this piece of advice in it. The next piece of advice I would want to go back and give myself is to try to grow more intuitively. I'm a very data-driven, analytical person. So obviously when I saw that growing cannabis involved all of these different intricacies, I wanted to plan everything out down to the step by step. But as I got further into my first grow, I noticed myself becoming more relaxed. And part of it is I'm sure it's a gaining experience, confidence thing. But also another part of it is that you're nurturing another living thing. And as much as people like to give technical advice, which is really important, growing cannabis or really any skill like this is not a paint by numbers. Every seed is going to be different. Every strain is going to be different. Even multiple plants of the same strain, same seed, breeder, everything are going to be at least slightly different to each other. So while it's really important to have the skills to be able to, say, regulate your climate, water effectively, feed effectively, you also want to be almost like you have a relationship with this plant because you're spending every day, every couple days with it for months throughout its entire life cycle. And you'll get to a point where you can kind of, you read it and you can kind of what little communication you can have with the plant, seeing as it can't talk. You just want your mind to be open to that level of communication that you can have with it, where you can look at its leaves, you can look at the soil, and just kind of understand what it's going through just by the little subtleties in it. I have a couple of charts that I downloaded just from random websites before I started, and that's kind of whenever I have an issue, before I go and ask someone for advice, I reference the charts, and I'd oh, the top leaves are bending like this, and then these leaves are changing color this way. I know that, it's X deficiency or too much light or whatever variable I need to tweak. Then I'll go ask somebody either to validate, my idea or to give me advice about it. There's only so much learning you can do in any given day, but you still got to keep the grow going. And there's no one size fits all, routine for every single plant. So you have to be able to be flexible and kind of live in the moment with this plant. Along the same lines, I also want to talk about the resilience of plants in general, or just specifically the cannabis plant. When you're first learning how to grow, at least with me, I was very anxious and paranoid about killing the plant or damaging it to the point where I'm throwing weeks or months of work down the drain. As I've gone week by week with these plants, it's pretty apparent that I don't know, I feel you have to do something really crazy to really screw them up that bad. And it's something you just have to get used to. But especially starting the bonsai and realizing that I can twist them around and, kind of push them around a little bit and they're fine. Also with my bonsai, I heard another podcast talk about this exact thing. So I thought it was awesome because I was already doing it before I heard them say it. But I just use my leftover water for my bonsai. So my bonsai is just getting a random assortment of whatever leftover newts were in the water from watering my main plants. And even that, I haven't seen any real deficiencies yet. The plants look very happy and healthy. I know bonsais have because of the soil or the lack of soil or lack of medium, they have different nutritional requirements, but I'm literally just winging it and it looks okay. Now I'm not going out and saying uproot your plants or do anything super crazy with them, but I was surprised to find out just the lack of fragility, I guess is the way to put it, where I was thinking, I was handling like glass this whole time. And along the same lines, the last thing I want to talk about today is the difference between different types of errors when growing. And I think that's part of the stress that comes along with being a new grower, is that you hear from other growers like, oh, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this wrong. And kind of like what I said before, everyone has their own opinion. But at the same time, I personally feel like there's two different types of errors that you can make. There are errors that are like true errors where you're actually hurting the plant or you're damaging the plant in some way. So you're talking about things like overwatering, underwatering, overfeeding, underfeeding, different deficiencies or abundances in the different elements that the plant needs for food. And then the second type of errors are what I think of as like optimization errors, where it doesn't hurt the plant, but it may hurt the plant's yield or the quality of the final product. That's what a lot of the conversations I see with growers are, like how to best optimize the plant to get the biggest yield and get the best product. And at the end of the day, yield and product quality are going to be the two main factors that you look for. But when you're first growing, I feel like it's so overwhelming just trying to keep the plant alive. It's important where if someone says you're doing something wrong, or someone tells you that, or you watch a video where someone's like, stop doing this to your plants, top 10 reasons to blah, 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 But understanding the difference between like a really critical error in your grow and just an error that results in a lack of optimization. Because the optimization are things that you can work on in subsequent grows, where like critical errors you really need to fix right there on the spot. And I know I've had this conversation with somebody else. I don't know, it's kind of a hard line to balance, being like, hey, like sometimes when I'm talking to someone, I just have to be like, hey, am I really screwing up or am I just not optimizing? Because if I'm not optimizing, I can go do research. I can integrate it later in this grow or later in in subsequent grows kind of thing. Like an example would be like, oh, you don't have like extra supplemental lighting, where it's like you don't necessarily need that. It may help optimization, but your plant's not going to die if you don't have LED lights stuck to the side of your tent or something like that. But yeah, that's all I wanted to get into today, was a bunch of lessons that I've learned throughout my first grow and advice I would want to go back and tell myself. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. Apparently you guys like sending me comments based on dumb things I say, which is great because I'm dumb. I'm very new at this. But I wanted to start the podcast anyways. Like, everyone wants to be like super authoritative when it comes to making content. With me personally, I like making content while I'm learning, because once I know how to do something, making content, it just feels like I'm regurgitating what I already know, where I kind of like to podcast like live in the moment kind of thing. But yeah, let me know your thoughts, hit me up, and have a great week, everyone. Peace.